Just recently, I did a talk on the power of no, asserting that most of men's problems were in some way of their own making, that their decisions with women were often poor, lending men to being subjected to abuse and to the abridgment of their rights. I got a response in dissent of that talk from Martin Lowe, who brought up some points that are well worth continuing the talk on the power of no. His questions deserve the best answers I can give him, and I hope they'll be useful to you as well. Martin asks, and I quote, "What power by saying no do you have if you're being abused by your feminist mother? What power of no do you have if you're being discriminated against as a man in education and at your job? What power of no do you have when you're being jailed based on wrong accusations? Saying no is not enough. It only protects you until you have stepped into the trap, and it does not protect your children at all." And that is the totality of Martin's comment and questions, and I thank you for those, Martin, and I want to answer them one point at a time. First, he asks, what power by saying no do you have if you're being abused by your feminist mother? That's a great question with two possible answers, depending on whether you're an adult or dependent child. For dependent children, we are really talking about a different ballgame. Just like with most any other form of abuse by parents against children, it is impractical, unfair, and unrealistic to put the onus on children to protect themselves. Ideally, if you have a dependent child, a son, being abused by a feminist mother, you should have a father willing to put a stop to it. If that father is absent, it won't do the child any good to speak to them about the power of no, because no has no real power between younger children and their parents. A young child saying no to a borderline feminist mother is about as effective as a Just Say No to Drugs campaign. But if you have a father anywhere near the scene, however, who is prepared to be the one to say no, to pay the price for it in order to stop the abuse, it can serve as a very, very valuable lesson for the child, a lesson they can benefit from as they grow older, even if it fails to stop the abuse at the time. On the other hand, when you have an adult being abused by a feminist mother, the only rational way to view that situation is that they are volunteering for the abuse. The inability to say no to a parent as an adult is a self-inflicted wound. Often these individuals hide their weakness behind love and respect for the parent. They treat their parent, and generally all parents, like sacred cows who cannot be challenged by their children. Or they avoid asserting their own dignity because they would feel guilty making the parent feel bad. While it is inarguable that many dysfunctional parents brainwash their children into thinking it's wrong to have boundaries within your own family, the onus is still on the individual to push past that conditioning. Saying you have to accept abusive treatment from a feminist mother is just another gynocentric cop-out, another way to excuse failure. And in these cases, no is still the answer. Mr. Lowe's next point was as follows. What power of no do you have, he asks, if you are being discriminated against as a man in education and at your job? Well, Mr. Lowe, I only have one answer for that, albeit in the form of a question. What are you willing to risk to not live on your knees? Since education and employment are really two different areas, allow me to give a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. Sage Gerard, formerly a Voice for Men's director for collegiate activism, came under attack at his school at Kennesaw State University. I've linked to the story below. For his efforts as an MRA establishing a men's issues group at that school, he was slandered and subjected to multiple false police reports. The faculty at the school engaged in a long-running, malicious campaign to derail him academically and prevent his graduation. He rolled up his sleeves and said no to all of it. He figuratively spit in their eyes and stood his ground. And lo and behold, despite their best efforts, he graduated and is doing quite well for himself today. Now, of course, things could have gone worse. They could have succeeded in getting him expelled or in some other way undermined his plans to graduate. But even if they had, he was willing to pay that price. He could not, would not be bullied. He rested totally on the power of no and was prepared to deal with the outcome. And that brings me to a crucial point, Mr. Lowe. If you are looking to understand the power of no, but only want that understanding if it costs you nothing, then you're missing the point. I can use myself as a good example of that. I make the only living I have from writing with the use of social media. It's not a great living, but it keeps me fed and most of my bills paid on time. I chose to live life this way, which is a good thing because by standing up and speaking to these issues, I have Google poisoned my job prospects in any conventional way. My education and extensive work experience are no longer assets in a job search because one set of returns on my name from Google will 100% guarantee I won't be hired. Again, the power of no is not the power to skate on all consequences. Matter of fact, the use of no, right where it belongs, will extract some sort of price in most cases. That said, I'm not suggesting that men go into their places of employment and education on a path like Sage Gerard or myself. I'm not saying that anything like that is required to avail yourself of the power of no. I'm just saying that if you're looking for a way to constantly live by your values, but never face challenges and never get uncomfortable, then you're missing the mark. Finally, Martin asks, what power of no do you have when you're being jailed based on wrong accusations? Well, sir, I am betting you're going to hate the answer to this question. Maybe a lot of people will, and that's okay. But I still only have the answers that I have. In most cases of false allegations, they were able to happen because no wasn't exercised when it could have and should have made a difference. Certainly, there are going to be cases where no amount of preparation helps. Mark Pearson is a great example of this. I've linked his story below. The guy walked across a train platform and brushed past an actress, who later reported to the police that she had been sexually assaulted. His life was ripped to shreds and stayed that way till the prosecution's wrongful case against him fell apart. His power of no was useless in that situation, but I equate what happened to him to being like getting struck by lightning. It was a completely unjust, crazy, wrong miscarriage of justice, and it happening once is one time too many, but it is an atypical case of wrongful accusation. Most men who find themselves on the wrong end of false accusations do so because they failed to recognize the danger that modern women represent and because they failed to take precautions. In other words, they failed to follow Mike Pence rules. Not only that, they failed to follow Paul Elam rules too. That being that they failed to use any sort of screening for women other than whether the woman they were attracted to seemed to reciprocate the attraction. Men constantly put themselves into compromising he said, she said positions with women because they spend time alone with them, many times with alcohol involved, with no inkling whatsoever of their character. Vice President Pence is very unlikely, even in the current hysteria, to be the target of false accusations because he never allows himself to be alone with women he doesn't know. His wife is present at any meeting he has with women. I am saying to some degree or another that this has to include single men as well. The rules, my rules, say I don't spend 5 minutes alone with a woman if I don't know anything about her character. And in the process of assessing their character, what do you imagine I use? That's right, the power of no. I've suggested to men for years that if you want to assess a woman's character, one, but not by any means the only way to do so, is to tell her no. Do that and study her reaction very, very carefully, and you'll get some good information on whether you want to move on to the next step with that woman. Look, and this is for everyone as well as Martin Lowe, the power of no isn't disaster proofing. Any man can certainly step on a landmine without having any way to know he was even in a minefield. As it did with Mark Pearson, lightning can strike. You can also encounter the random drunk driver and get hurt or killed, and the odd woman here and there can find a way to make a wreck of your life without any help from you. Nothing can insulate you from life itself. Focusing on that, however, is a huge mistake. You can protect yourself from most disasters. If Mike Pence, a married man, can do it, anyone can. The average man will meet a particular kind of woman in his life, perhaps several of them. This kind of woman will do three things almost without fail. She will come on sexually very fast. She will love bomb him, making him feel like the most special man in the world before she can possibly even know him. And finally, she will complain about some sort of abuse in her life, painting herself as the damsel in distress. These three things, all reasons to run like hell, to exit with extreme prejudice, also happen to be what attracts most men and sucks them in. And of course, later, almost all of them will swear before God that they had no way of seeing the train wreck coming. Until men quit thinking in this ridiculously dysfunctional way, they will keep getting it right up the backside. And then there's the simple, very basic stuff to remember, as long as, it's 2018. That woman with the allegedly abusive boyfriend, she doesn't need your help. Tell her to call 911 and get away from her ASAP. That drunk girl at the bar needing a ride home, tell her to call Uber. The lady with the flat tire on the side of the road, sorry about that. Everyone should have an auto service anyway. I know all of this sucks. It feels jaded and cynical. Well, sorry about that too. It's the world we live in, and we are all advised to remember that. The power of no means nothing if you don't exercise it. I understand Mr. Lowe's frustrations, even in that minority of things, the landmines that men can step on that should never even be there in the first place. Our only real answer of any worth is in the mirror. Being unable to see the world as it is because you're so focused on the world as you think it ought to be doesn't help anyone. Lightning strikes aside, Mr. Lowe. Most men who get into problems with women, the vast majority, were undone first by their own bad choices. The only thing that helps with that is the truth, and as cold as the truth can be, it won't stab you in the back a single time. And that is it for this talk today. As always, folks, I hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and we'll see you next time.